it's a huge decision to make, but also, is it about the way it's happening or is it about the outcome? Welcome to Come Back with Erica Cobb, a community of folks like yourselves who are getting ready and staying ready for their next chapter. Now, today is the beginning of a very special series because, as you know, I've been very transparent with my journey with infertility. 11% of women in this country, or actually across the world, are affected by infertility. And I happen to be one of those 11%. And I didn't know it until just a few years ago. So I decided to really open up my life in a way that I haven't necessarily opened it up before, because so many of you have had questions. Because the truth about the matter is, infertility has always been seen as something that can be a bit, taboo, or it can take away from people's feelings of what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a mother. And to me, none of those things are true. And the idea that in this country, so many of our rights have been stripped from us in a way that has been unprecedented in history. I think it's really important that we are transparent about what we are going through and why it's important to talk about it so that we can get more resources behind it. So today, I am introducing my guest. He is my husband, Anthony, and he is sitting down with me to answer some of your questions about our journey and just the process of IVF and all of the things that lead up to it and what happens after, so that together we can tell everyone how important these conversations are, and we can improve the state of not only women's health rights, but also the access to fertility solutions. So Anthony, thank you so much for being here with me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. We've done maybe one podcast before, but it certainly wasn't about our lives. And contrary to popular belief, we are pretty private about most things in our lives. So this will kind of be a first for both of us together.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, let's get to some of the questions. Can you share your journey with infertility and what led to you considering IVF as an option? Okay. So for me, when we got married in 2016, I pulled the goalie. I was using an IUD, and I thought that, when the time was right, that we would just get pregnant and we would move on with our lives and our growing family. And after a few years of not getting pregnant, I started to ask some questions of my then OBGYN. And that led to a couple of years of trying to figure out if this was a me thing, if it was an us thing, until finally I found an OBGYN who was a bit more of a diagnostic approach. And she had me go in for an HSG, which is when they put fluid into your fallopian tubes, and then they look to see what's happening. And it turned out that my fallopian tubes were actually pretty much deflated. Which meant that there was no way for the sperm to get to the egg. And then that started a whole other series of events to figure out what other issues I was having with fertility.
And I think for me, just to rewind a little bit, we first began in 2019. And this was a mistake I made. I went in and got tested immediately as soon as your doctor kind of, I don't think prescription's the right word, but referred me to the clinic. It was easy. It was fun. It was something I'd practiced a lot.
Oh my God.
And I quickly determined, in my mind, I was okay. And I came home and told you, well, I'm good. Your turn, kind of thing. And in hindsight, that was something I regretted, because I think you had some mental work to do to kind of get to that next step, and you're battling some fear that I didn't really recognize at the time.
Yeah. I think there were a few things, because people will ask, well, why did you wait for so long? I mean, I'm 43, and obviously, if everything is going according to what people refer to as the clock, which, whether you believe in the biological clock in terms of like, if you don't have a child by 35, then it's just not going to happen. But there were a lot of issues for me there, and I had to go to therapy. A big part of the way that I would think about becoming a mother was there was so much fear about me not being able to provide for myself and my child independent of you. And it's not because we don't have a great relationship or you're not a provider, because all of those things, we have a great relationship. You are a provider and I trust you and we have, everything going for us. But psychologically, I think when I went through my setback season, it was just me. And I really felt like I put a lot of faith in the idea that I could get through anything on my own, but I didn't necessarily have the faith that I would be able to get through anything with this person who was going to have to depend on me. And I didn't realize how much I didn't feel ready in terms of the setup for myself and this child. If something were to happen to you, if something were to happen to us, and that was like a real emotional barrier for me to think like, I'm not necessarily ready to do this on my own, even though I had you. And so going through therapy really made me realize like a lot of my fears were coming from my setback season, that I was able to get through it in my head. I was able to get through it because it was just me, not accounting for the idea that like my mother has gotten through so many things. And, women in my life who didn't have a partner had gotten through so many things and had major comeback seasons with children. I just didn't give myself that type of credit or acknowledge that that wasn't my situation.
Yeah, and we had a lot. I think when we first visited your OBGYN, that was like October of 2019. I remember the date because it's in my chart, but I went December 2019 to get my test completed. And then I think a lot of the part of the problems we were having was we were both stressed at work too, which wasn't helping anything. And then, something I learned that I hadn't learned in health class was like how small that window of when it's going to work is. And a lot of times we were both traveling on that day. So that was kind of a weird timing, obviously pre-pandemic. And then we had the whole pandemic to ride it out where, well, we were around and with each other at least at the right time of the month. So I think that helped confirm there was some issues too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was very grateful to have met my OBGYN when I did, because we had such a even smaller window to figure out some things. And that kind of leads to the next question. What was your experience with IVF like? And what challenges did you face during the process? My heart is out there to all of you who are dealing with fertility issues. I understand that it can be incredibly frustrating, but it's a process that if you have to go through, I'm here with you, and I'm sending you so much love. So IVF was our solution because not only did I find out that my fallopian tubes were deflated, but also there was an issue with some of my levels. So that's when I went in to get an MRI, and we discovered that I have a tumor on my brain, which is benign, thankfully. So it's not cancerous, but it is on... oh Lord, I'm having a brain fart. Pituitary gland. Thank you. It's on my pituitary gland, which is responsible for things like uterine lining, the ability to produce breast milk, and it's another issue when it comes to fertility. Now, I was able to take medication. It's called cabergoline, that kind of helps with increasing your pituitary levels, which I did going into the IVF process. And the IVF process for me it wasn't as scary as it was that it felt very complicated in the beginning. So we just went in for an ultrasound. This is my third ultrasound. There's so many medications. You have to take them at the right time. A lot of them are self-administered through needles, which I had never done before. But honestly, after the first few days of doing the IVF process with the injections and all of that, it felt very normal to do. Like it wasn't as complicated as I felt it was going to be.
Yeah, I agree. And the clinic we got, it seemed like they, whether it was intentional or not, like dripped the information out versus explaining the whole process.
Yeah.
So we kind of had to figure it out step by step, which was kind of painful. But
I think that's something that I've realized I'm not really great at. Like, I need all the information up front, and then I need the step-by-step process because I need to see the bigger picture. Like, even being in school now, I'm like, oh, some of this would have been easier for me to comprehend had I seen the bigger picture of what was happening and then go through each step. So that would be my only thing for people going through IVF. If you're like me and you need to see like the process all the way through, there are a lot of resources out there, and the clinics generally do provide you with those resources. But I would ask for like the whole kit and caboodle and then go through the step-by-step process, because I think that would have clarified some things very early on for me. In terms of like how I felt physically, I don't feel like my body is the same post IVF that it was pre IVF. Like I just noticed things that, and maybe it's because our last rounds of, me administering the drugs and stuff is still just a matter of like a few months ago. But I really feel physically different. And I don't really know what that's about. And I'd be curious for other people who've gone through IVF, if that's something that you experience, if it's something that takes like maybe 6 months to a year to get back to normal. But I think that's something that I'm very much aware of, that I don't necessarily feel the same. What did it feel like for you in terms of having to administer the drugs to me?
I didn't have an issue with it. I mean, I didn't like poking you with a needle, but I wasn't squeamish about it. It wasn't a big issue. I guess I wanted to make sure I was there and as much as I could be to kind of support you. And
I'm very proud of her, and she's gonna do great and be safe.
The first round kind of caught us both off guard, how quick it started, and Jure actually, I think, had to be there for your first shot.
Yeah, well, the first shot for like at the end,
right?
Because
the trigger shot,
the trigger shot, yeah, because you were traveling. So yeah, Jure, for those of you who have been following me for a while, is my makeup artist, but he's also like my little brother, bestie, all those things. So he comes over at 8:00 in the morning, and he's like, "Yeah, I'll shoot you in the butt." So we're very close. Yeah, that was, I did feel like very comfortable with you doing it. Although at times I was like, you would hesitate just a little bit. And I'm like, just do it. Just do it.
I think some of our friends that we had talked to about it too were, skinny little twigs that had no muscle to get the needle. So I think that played into how bad they made it seem.
Skinny little twigs in the nicest way possible. They're thin women. I have a little bit more junk in my trunk. Yeah.
But people really overhyped the trigger shot, I thought, right, relative to our situation. And I wasn't the one taking the needle. So
yeah, I think, well, and I do think that that's an important point, because our other friends who had gone through IVF are more petite than I am and smaller women. So they were talking about like, some of the bruising and coagulation, for lack of a better word. I didn't experience that as much, but I also have more body fat than they do. So depending on, your body, it can affect you differently, which might also lead to why I feel just a little bit more different. I don't know, a few months after. But we did go through 3 rounds. Today we are going to what is called trigger, which means that I'm like 2 days out from the actual retrieval. Today is my second egg retrieval. The first one went so well, I figured why not do it again? It's round 3. That's 3 retrievals. The first round we were like very lasered in. The second round we were still lasered in. Third round I was like, you're like, I'm gonna come home and give you the shot, and I'm like, don't bother, just like it was just very normal at that point. IVF, but make it fashion. So by the third round, I felt like, I got this. But 3 rounds is a lot. Apparently, I can eat after this, so I have asked for 5 guys.
How did you feel emotionally on the drugs? And
I definitely felt the hormones for sure. I don't think I'm the most emotional person in the world, but I'm not like the least emotional. And I did feel a little bit more on edge for sure. A little more sensitive about things. But I think just being on any kind of hormone, that's to be expected.
from my perspective, I didn't find you like, I was kind of like listening to all these horror stories from other people, and I was expecting you to be this crazy person, which I did not experience at all. You seemed happier, and yes, you had to sleep a lot, which was understandable. But that was kind of counterintuitive to me. It felt like kind of a nice time where we were both around the house and cleared our schedules a bit, and spent a little bit more time together. And I think when you were coming off of the drugs for the egg harvest medication, that maybe was when you seemed a little bit more tense than when you're actually on them.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that. I think I too was very much expecting to be a little more all over the place. But I also think because I was working during that time and being on a talk show and being live and in front of the cameras every day, I now realize how little control I really had of my energy for like 7 years straight. So it was almost something that I could focus on that could only lead to something positive, in theory, as opposed to like I knew why I was doing it, where when I was at work or like in that atmosphere, I don't feel like, I obviously know I'm going to work and I'm doing a talk show and all of that is great. And that was my dream for so long. But I had so little control over what I was going to feel like from day to day. And I think this gave me more control over my feelings because I could concentrate on what I was doing and why I was doing it. So
the nesting impact of estrogen was real. We got a lot of candles, a lot of pillows, a lot of carpets.
It was a lot of nesting going on. Yeah. No, that's true. That's true. Huh, maybe I need to take a pill for that now. All right. How did you make the decision to move from IVF to surrogacy? Was there a particular turning point? So this is something that's new to a lot of, to everyone, because I haven't really been forthcoming about our journey to what people will call surrogacy. We refer to it as a gestational carrier. After I kind of shared the story of we had a miscarriage and then one that didn't take, which they still consider it a miscarriage in terms of the transfer. We tried again 2 weeks ago, and unfortunately, that result ended up negative. So I am still in deep faith that we are going to become parents in whatever way that looks like. We had a decision to make, and to be totally honest about it, during the last round, the last round of IVF, in February, I was reading Gabrielle Union's book, and it was her second book, and she was talking about her decision to find a gestational carrier. And she talked about, I believe that she had 10 embryos with her husband, Dwayne, and she went through 9 transfers that all resulted in miscarriages. And Kavya, her daughter, was the 10th embryo, and she decided to go ahead and go the gestational carrier route. And I remember reading that in February. I remember being in my kitchen, and I thought, when she was talking about keeping it going and trying to, have this transfer work and carry her own child, I thought, I wonder if that's ego or if that's biological. Like, why would you continue to do it? And I thought to myself, like, I probably would just exhaust every option to try to carry my own child. But is that the best route to go if you have the resources to find alternate routes? And I made a decision after reading her book, and she talked about how it was her ego that really got in the way in terms of, not making that decision earlier. And I thought, wow, she's really lucky that that last embryo actually worked. And if I were in that situation, I wouldn't wait until I had my very last embryo to make that decision, because what if the gestational carrier doesn't work? So I made the decision in February that if we had X amount of embryos, I would go to half, essentially, and then make the decision to try to use a gestational carrier. And so that's really how we came to that, because I had already made that decision.
And maybe a little context around when we first sat down with the doctor, they gave us the impression, with all our numbers and stats and collective ages, we'd be lucky to get one healthy embryo.
Right.
So
out of 3 rounds.
To put that in perspective, we got 2 after the first round, 1 in the second round. We had this decision to make: do we want to do a third round of egg retrievals or not? We decided to do that and got another 2 embryos. So we were starting with 5 embryos.
Right. Yeah. And I'm glad we made that decision, because we started off saying that we would do 3 rounds of IVF. After 2 rounds, I decided to go ahead and get the embryos tested, because at that point we had like 18.
Yeah, you start off with, they'll fertilize the egg the day of. In total, I think you're right. Yeah, about 18 embryos. Then they let them mature for 4 or 5 days. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the first hurdle, if they mature and divide enough. So that kind of culled down the count to what?
Well, it was 22 to 18 after maturation. And then we used to know these numbers like the back of our hands. Yeah. And then when they went into when we decided to get them genetically tested, which is something you can do to see if there's any genetic anomalies, if they're viable, how viable are they, and they get graded. So we went in with 12, and then they tell you that it's 20%.
Yeah, they kind of, for each step along the way, they gave you a fraction. And then when you multiply all those fractions together, it was like 12.5% of whatever your total embryos to start were.
Yeah.
Could be viable, genetically tested viable embryos.
Yeah. So we actually ended up with 4 embryos from the first 2 rounds. Yeah. But one of the embryos was a mosaic, which means that it's healthier and genetically more healthy than not, but they can't 100% tell you either way, like what is happening with this particular embryo. So that embryo doesn't get a grade, so to speak. So because we didn't have a solid 4 graded embryos, then I made the decision to do another round to try to get at least one more, because we kind of went back and forth with this. I was initially supposed to do 3 rounds back to back to back. And I made the decision to stop at 2 because, one, I had a lot of fatigue behind the IVF journey in general, but I also, in the back of my head, could not wait any longer to find out if any of these embryos were actually viable, because then we would have another decision to make about if we were going to go with a donor, like a donor or donor egg, or what that meant. So I needed to know, and that's the reason why we stopped down. And then we made the decision to go back in for one more round, and that's when we got another graded embryo. So we were sitting with 4 graded embryos and a mosaic. And just to be clear about this mosaic embryo, we still consider the mosaic as an option for transfer, because we actually know a couple of mosaic babies, and they're totally healthy and happy and all of those things. So, and they were viable pregnancies, which is, the most important thing that we're looking at.
So you go through this process, you get, give eggs, create embryos, those get chopped in half, and then half again, and then half again. And at the end of the day, you have embryos that have, at best, a 70% chance of a live birth.
Yeah.
And we had, at the peak of the embryos, we had 4 kind of ranging between 50 and 65% of a live birth. So we were kind of coming out of the egg retrievals feeling like rock stars relative to what the doctor started out with.
Right. Yeah. Because they were like, you be lucky if you get 1 in 3 rounds. And I was like, well, why the hell are we doing this? Like, that seems like a very slim chance. But people do it, and it results in pregnancy and children. And so I think we were just feeling really lucky at that point. The next question is, what are some of the emotional hurdles you faced throughout your infertility journey? Whew. Emotional hurdles. I do think in the beginning, when I found out that I had fertility issues, I had a lot of emotion surrounding it, because I come from a pretty large family and no one seemingly had any fertility issues. I also felt like it was incredibly unfair for a long time, because I had prepared and prepared and prepared in terms of making sure that I would have a child and have the stability to have a child. I think I have a lot of financial trauma in my past, and it was something that was very much on the forefront for me. And that's just my journey. I understand that people do it with so much less. I grew up with a lot less, so I get that you can have a very successful life and family, and you don't need a cajillion dollars to do it. But I just felt like I have a lot of financial trauma. I have financial PTSD, especially as someone who had such a massive setback season. I lost everything, and I really didn't have anyone to turn to be like, hey, can you carry me? And that was something that just always stays with me. I always want to be able to independently provide for myself and anyone else who I might be able to produce. Even though I have an amazing partner, it's just always in my head.
Yeah, I think in general, it's an emotional roller coaster. So it's hard to pick just one emotional barrier. And it's different than anything else I've experienced in life, where you're able to control a lot of it, and you can, kind of start with an idea, dream about it, work at it, and hopefully achieve it. And it's different that way. So I think, especially when it takes two people and the man's shoes, it's definitely much easier, I think, emotionally, because I never grew up thinking I was going to be the one carrying a baby. I never, whether you dreamed about it or not, you're thinking about it on some level. So I think, it's less of a impact on my identity as a man, especially because I was lucky I didn't have any sperm issues like other guys might go through. So to me, the hardest emotional part was probably the transfers, and when you start thinking and dreaming about your baby on the other side and then you lose them. So I think that by far was the hardest part for me.
Yeah. I think after the first transfer, like, to be honest, the first transfer, I was a little not unsure, because I was going in like 100% very positive, very optimistic. And I literally felt like when they transfer. So when you have embryos and they're transferring it and they're dropping it off, you can actually see that process. So it actually creates a spark in the uterus. And so when they drop it off, like, I don't know.
Erica was a little bit high on drugs when this was happening. But it's on ultrasound.
Yeah.
You're sitting there watching it. You can see the catheter go in, and there's a little air bubble when they push the embryo out against the uterine lining, and it looks like a spark of creating life, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And I filmed it for her so she could see it,
Yeah.
sober.
Yeah.
And
I was just on a little pill. They give you a little pill. What is it? Some type of a muscle relaxer or something. But yeah, so that happened, and I felt it. Like, I could feel it. I felt over the course of those next few days, like, and I was reading about it because I'm like, is it all in my mind? But no, a lot of people talk about how you can feel the implantation, and I felt it, and I was so sure. Now I was going through acupuncture, which I had been doing for years at that point. Get yourself a really great acupuncturist. I do think that acupuncture made my follicle count grow. My acupuncturist is essentially a OBGYN for Chinese medicine. And so she came that day. I met with her that day before I went in for the transfer. And then I went to see her immediately after the transfer. And she wanted me to, so they tell you it's about 9 days before you go in for your blood test. And that's when they determine if you're pregnant. Now, I was so sure I was pregnant. And she had me do at-home pregnancy tests with the line, because in Chinese medicine, unlike what's happening over here, they're actually measuring your levels in a different way. So the lines that dictate that if you're pregnant versus if you're not pregnant, if you're taking like an at-home test, the deeper the line, the more pregnant you are. Basically, that's the gosh, I'm having such brain farts today.
Anyone going through this, you're going to be Googling a ton of stuff,
Yeah.
whether or not they'll tell you not to look stuff up on the internet, you're going to do it. So that's one thing we looked up. The P stick measures HCG.
Right.
So depending on the HCG levels, the line can be lighter or darker, which this was another surprise for us, because we thought the outcome would be very black or white. You're pregnant or you're not pregnant.
So I did the at-home test. It was very early. They tell you not to do the at-home test. But again, my acupuncturist wanted me to do that so that she could help measure my levels by essentially spiking me. And that's supposed to allow the HCG levels to increase, and you kind of monitor that. So I was taking the test every day, or every time I went to see her. So I would go to see her twice a week, and I would take the test, and I had 2 lines, but they were very, very faint. So she was trying to help with that process. And then at the 9th day, I went in for the blood test, and they told me that my HCG levels were very low, and that it basically was like essentially like an ectopic
Well,
pregnancy.
yeah, that point they're like, congratulations, you're pregnant, but you're at 10 parts per million HCG. We need to see you between 50 and 100. So now this super long week of waiting is going to continue. You're coming back Monday for another test, and hopefully that 10 goes to a 50.
Yeah.
So now we had to wait another couple days that we weren't expecting. We were kind of just ready for an answer one way or another.
Mm-hmm. And then, so we got the test results back, and they were like, we're going to need you to stop all medication, and you're going to miscarry.
Yeah, after the second one. Yeah.
Which happened.
I'm going to go in and I'm going to get acupuncture, and we're going to hope for the best, staying hopeful.
I think that was definitely the most emotionally draining part, because you're on so much medication. So like your uterine lining is very thick. To expel a pregnancy is very, very traumatic. And I think that was something where that was definitely the most emotionally taxing part.
Yeah, that one was a drawn out, painful part of it for sure.
Yeah. Oh man, been through a lot. So how do you work through those feelings? I think the first time, it was very, very strange. So I consider myself a very spiritual person, and I kind of reconciled in my head. So there's this child that has visited me a lot throughout the years, and it's a very specific child that has visited in my dreams. I don't know if has visited.
Yeah, I had a dream.
Yeah, about this very specific child. And so the first pregnancy, I kind of was like, okay, I needed to kind of like go through that, because this spirit is making room for this very specific child. Yeah. So it just wasn't.
And to step back, we know the genders of each embryo. We knew the first embryo did not match the gender that we had seen in our dreams.
Right.
Independently.
Right. So so then I was kind of like, okay, so this child is essentially making room for our child. And so then I was like on this whole mission, like, okay, so the second one, that's going to be it. That's going to be it. And then we found out that I was going to miscarry again. And that's when, I don't know, like, I feel like I cried more the second time than the first time, because the first time I think I was just so in like, okay, like, let's go. Like, let's do this again, and it's going to work. And then the second time I was like, am I not supposed to be doing this? Like, I don't understand. Because the other thing is, in terms of our health and the health of the embryos, the doctors are saying, like, we don't know what went wrong. Like, everything was perfect, your levels were perfect. The embryo is perfect. Like, your health is perfect. Like, there's no reason why this shouldn't be happening. And it's like, at that point, you want a reason, because now I'm like, well, I don't want to go through all of our embryos and just be like, well, I don't know, each time. And if you can't give me an answer, then we need to switch out something, and switching out something meant switching out me. And, I don't know if I ever really, really thought about the idea of someone else carrying my child. I mean, that's a huge trust exercise. And then I think it became a little bit more emotional because we didn't know anyone personally who fit the qualifications. And now we're like, okay, we're going to try to find a stranger to carry our child. And that's when I think it started to like weigh on me about what that meant for me. Like, I don't know, like, I don't know if I'm necessarily the most maternal person in the world, but I am a very, very nurturing person. And I'm like, am I going to be okay with not getting that bond and that time that like everyone talks about? Like, will my kid like me? Like, like, I mean, that was, and it still is. It's like, it's a huge decision to make, but also, is it about the way it's happening, or is it about the outcome? Because honestly, I think when we became CASAs, Anthony and I became court-appointed special advocates for children who are in the child welfare system, foster kids, and we had this sibling group of 5, and you're told that, you are a representative for the child, and you go to court and you're the only one who speaks on behalf of the child. And we were supposed to have this case for like a year max, and it ended up being a longer case. Thank you. So we were with these kids for almost 3 years and got to see them become adopted. And I never thought that, like, and not that we were actually going to do this, but like I would often like think sometimes like, man, they could just come live here. Like, we could take them. And that's not an option if you're a CASA, and I'm not being totally serious, but like, you do, like, you create this bond. And I just thought, like, if things were different, we could totally take them and they could live with us and we would take care of them. And if that was an option, like, I really believe we would have. So a part of me is like, it doesn't matter if I don't give birth to these children. It doesn't make them any less mine, regardless of if they're our embryos or if we adopt it. Like, it doesn't make these children any less yours. But I think a part of me does feel like, not necessarily guilt, like there's nothing I can do about my fallopian tubes being flat as pancakes. Like, there's nothing I can do about having a tumor on my pituitary gland. Like, I didn't do that. It's just something that happened. So I don't know. I think it will kind of be a struggle, but I really did appreciate that one of my friends, that we were going through IVF at the same time, and she ended up having a little boy, and he's 1 now. And she said to me at his birthday party, she's like, when I look at him, I just think like how happy I am that he's here. She's like, I do not concentrate on the 9 months that I was pregnant or giving birth. She's like, a lot of that seems like such a blur. She's like, it's seeing him and being able to be his mom every day that is the most important to me. And she's like, so if you don't get 9 months to carry and have to push out a kid, she's like, it's not something that you're going to think about when he's graduating or, when they're doing this or doing that. So I appreciated that because honestly, everybody's not so sensitive about that. Not that I'm overly sensitive about it, but people say some really up things. We can bleep that. Yeah, it's like there can be this like hierarchy on becoming a mom, and I just do not understand that at all. So I do appreciate sentiments like that being shared because I think it's important for people to hear.
For me, I guess, I think a little bit easier as the man not ever expecting to carry the baby again, to deal with these different pivots and on to the next option. Super excited that we do have embryos together, so that helps still. Obviously we got a lot to make it through still, but for me, I think where I landed was the whole process felt very scientific and mechanical, and like we're kind of short-circuiting, taking over this process that should be kind of a surprise and something you can't control, and it kind of puts you in your place as a human a bit, like we think we're the center of the universe and we can control everything, and I don't think that's true. And I think coming out the other side of all these bad surprises we've gotten, I think I feel more ready for the good surprises because I know that there are going to be things we expect and things we think we can control where we're going to get good surprises too. And the ball doesn't always bounce the same way. So I think that gives me a lot of perspective going into this next leg of it. Like maybe we're supposed to meet this GC, like who knows what that journey is going to bring? Who knows how that's going to change us? And there's so many facets of these different paths and effects that you can't even fathom. So that's the exciting part where the journey continues, and I think we're going to have some cool surprises and probably some more challenges along the way. But
yeah, I think, well, I guess we'll get more into this. So I'll go to the next frequently asked question. How do you find support during the IVF process? I think there is a huge fertility community on social media, and I've met some amazing fertility advocates, and I've also celebrated like when people have IVF wins and they're, pregnant and they're having a baby. And then I've also cried with people who have shared that, their IVF journey or that round didn't necessarily work out the way that they were hoping. And I think social media is really important in that respect, especially if you tune out any negativity surrounding it. Obviously, there's always going to be contrarians and people who live very, very sad lives, who want to say mean things to you. But it's so outweighed by the level of support and resource that I know I have found on social media, and also the fact that we have several friends who have gone through this journey. But that made me, I think that is a big support for me.
Yeah, I think, our decision to be so open about it, which, everyone make your own decision on that, but I think that's led to a lot more support because many, many people have gone through IVF. And if you haven't gone through IVF, then many people know someone that's gone through IVF. I do think that kind of leads to some comments where it's like, oh, I had a friend that went through IVF and they had a baby. You're going to be fine. Like, yeah, that's nice to hear, but maybe don't say that to people going through IVF because every case is different. So I think that's been great. Lots of support. As when we went through losing transfers, I think I learned a lot about our family and people around us, like whether the people went through IVF or not. Many people have lost children and had miscarriages, and they don't talk about it, especially people our parents' age. So I think I learned a lot about your parents and my parents and grandparents and stuff through that, which was a form of support. And then I think moving into this gestational carrier phase, that there's a lot less people that have gone through that. And we're just getting into that, but certainly like there's been offers of, oh, I know a friend of a friend that went through it that's really passionate about helping other women. Let me know if you want me to introduce you guys, kind of thing. So I think the support's there if you want it, but it's got to come kind of naturally, and you're not just going to connect with any other random person that also had a GC, you know?
Right. I think that leads to the next question. Why did you want to share your struggles with social media? You know, I very seldom want to share my struggles on social media. Because,
really? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you know, like people are already like rooting for the downfall. I'm like, damn, y'all, I just got up here. Why you want to take me down? But I really, honestly, in the beginning, I felt like there came a time where I didn't have a choice but to be honest about what was happening, because I was on live television every day. And you could see, like, during the second round, my nose actually got a little bigger, like, and people, and then of course, like, you're carrying more weight in your stomach. So people naturally assume, like, and people were congratulating me, which, you know, I don't have any real feelings about that. I know everyone's like, it's inappropriate to assume that a woman's pregnant, and it is inappropriate to assume, but I feel like the people who were like, you know, I feel you, or I'm seeing you, and, you know, like, they're just trying to be supportive, and I'm not going to, me personally, now I would hope they don't do this to other people, which I'm sure they do. But for me personally, I took it as a form of support, like people who were just rooting for me and excited that, you know, maybe I was pregnant. And it got to the point where when things got a little bit harder and we ran into some hurdles, I just decided to just be open about what was happening, because I kind of felt like every time I picked up my phone and went on social media, it like hit me a little differently. I was a little bit more sensitive to it. So I was just like, screw it. Like, and we talked about it. And I'm like, if I put it out in my own way, then it won't feel like I'm constantly like stepping on landmines in a way every time I pick up my phone with someone inquiring or congratulating, or, you know, saying like, you old bitch. It's not funny. It's not funny, but it is funny. Like, what goes through people's heads? What goes through people's heads? Sorry, that's so not funny. I don't know why I'm laughing. So many people. Sorry, I needed some levity. Okay. But being open on social media also helped me to create community, and I'm glad that I was. We went back and forth about if we were going to be open about gestational carriers, especially in the beginning, because to be quite honest about it, it's a very expensive option, and it's not covered by insurance or anything else. And I remember first hearing about what people will refer to as surrogacy. Now, a traditional surrogacy is when it's the surrogate or the carrier's egg and then donor sperm, essentially. So it's her body, her egg, is a traditional surrogacy. A gestational carrier means that it's our embryo, her body. people use it interchangeably, but now that we're in the process, we just say GC or gestational carrier to make it clear what we were looking for, because a lot of places do have a very definitive line between surrogacy and gestational carriers.
Right. What was the question?
About being open about it. So I didn't want to necessarily be open about that because when I first heard of a surrogate or gestational carrier, it came with a lot of scrutiny because it was seen as something that white women did who didn't want to ruin their bodies. And I guess it came out that way because I saw it in an episode of Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. And then it created a lot of talk about, why someone would use a surrogate or a gestational carrier. And it was kind of like, you're so privileged or you don't want to actually do what it takes to have a baby. So you do this. And honestly, I think that's a reason why a lot of people are so quiet about gestational carriers and using a surrogate. Now, in our case, trust me, I would rather have that money for a college education than to actually get a child here. I would have rather just been able to do it ourselves and not have to go through any of this, but that's not where we're at. So this is our personal option and we're choosing to do that. And I think that one thing that stood out to me when we were on our search for a gestational carrier agency was our liaison at a certain point when we were going through everything that it was going to take to do this. I just stopped and asked her, is there any financial aid? Is there any organization that assists families who aren't in the financial, situation to do this? And she just shook her head and said, not really. And what there is, it's not enough. And she's like, I'm hoping that people being open about it and bringing more awareness to it creates a normalization for it. And that not only will assist in finding more women who can potentially be gestational carriers, but also might create more access to the option of gestational carriers.
Yeah, it's a choice that we're lucky to be able to have for sure.
So obviously, as a part of us being transparent about our journey, where we were, where we are, where we hope to be, I'm going to sit down with other dynamic people who have been open about either their women's health issues in terms of maternal health, and also with families who have gone the IVF route, the gestational carrier route, to bring more awareness to this in general and the infertility process and options. So what questions do you have that are still looming about this next chapter of gestational carriers and surrogacy?
I think, we're about to kick off all the factors that make a match. So there's going to be a ton of questions there. Just like, what makes up the type of person that's willing to do this? Because it's a huge sacrifice, a huge risk. And yeah, you pay a little bit to them, but I don't think it really compares to what it involves. So I think, learning more about the type of people that become surrogates and GCs is probably my biggest question.
Yeah. Like, what drove them, or what was the deciding factor that they wanted to carry someone else's child?
Right. Like, I understand how we got here, and I understand how a couple that, 2 men, 2 women, I get that, how they get there. But who on the other side that doesn't have any issues basically decides voluntarily to get there and help people,
Yeah. I'm interested in the selection process because you can select everything. You can be very specific about race. You can be specific about location. if they're in a red state versus a blue state, which is something that is very important right now. Some agencies won't have a gestational carrier in a red state because of the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And that creates a whole nother dynamic if something were to happen during the process of carrying the child. You can also be specific about political affiliations and ideology, religion, if how many children they already have, because for our agency they must already have given a healthy live birth. That's a part of the criteria. So just going through everything to see, like, where is she? Who is she? Like, I have no idea who we're going to end up with. And that's like the biggest question in my head. That's like exciting, but also a little terrifying. I'm like, even after talking with the legal team, I was like, okay, so she can't steal my baby, right? Like, she can't, like, there's no way that can happen. But it's a good question. It's a fair question.
Yeah, it's gonna be trippy. Like,
Yeah.
this will be a terrible analogy, but we just got my parents a puppy, and the puppy just got shipped to them, and it's like, are we gonna like just go pick up our puppy almost?
No, not the puppy. No. Oh my gosh. No, it isn't. I get what you're saying, but I don't know if I would go there. Yeah, because we've talked about that too. Do we need to, if she's in another state, do we need to live there for the month before? Like, what if she gives birth early? I suggested that we charter a private plane. There's a lot of questions. So I am very much looking forward to speaking with some very, not only transparent, but people who have been very generous with their journeys in terms of infertility and IVF and surrogacy, and asking them questions about things that we can anticipate along the way, and providing resources for other people on this journey. So, my love, I thank you for not only being the most fantastic partner I could ever ask for, but also really supporting me on this journey, and not just the part that we're doing together, but also my need to be transparent with my testimony. And I appreciate you understanding that and being good with that, and joining us today to talk a little about it.
Well, thanks for having me, and I hope I added to it and didn't detract. And
there were a couple times I was like, all right, Anthony, what you doing? You were a great guest, so thank you.
Thanks.
I love you.
Love you too.
And thank you all for listening, for watching, and follow this journey as we get more in depth on the issues of infertility, IVF, and surrogacy.